Today we're going to talk about psychosthetics, methodology I developed over the last 30 years, and how you can apply it to your project and hopefully to your work going forward. I talk about moving people through research, design, brand engineering, and innovation. I think you'll see that in the presentation why we say that. So I came out of a human-centric environment at Xerox in the 70s. In the early 80s and about 82, I wrote an underpinning to drive my firm, which was young at the time, to be people-centric or human-centric. And the statement I made then that I still stand by today and we've used for over 4 decades is that it's not how you feel about the design or experience, it's how it makes you feel about yourself. That really is an underlying statement about human-centered design. So my experience at Xerox was I was thrown into a think tank as a sole industrial designer working with 200 programmers, 30 psychologists, and we developed the first touchscreen interface. So the actual first graphical user interface on screen for a touchscreen was developed at that time. Incredible challenge getting people to touch the screen, but we overcame it. And today you'll see how if you dig in and you know about Park, you'll see how these things affect our everyday lives. So innovation is what it's all about. It's not a buzzword. I'm going to talk about psychosthetics, which is also known as PA. It's a common language as you'll start to use it. It really forces collaboration between all stakeholders from the C-level to executives, to mid-management, to team members, and throughout your interaction. It's a visual language, which means that you can cross borders. And because it's a visual language, it triggers incredible recall, kind of a phenomenon that came out of the work, understanding how visual languages work. And it's all about, of course, creating success. There's no point in doing it otherwise. We have 4 things that we believe everyone must do in business to be successful. And the way we look at it is that we have to do things that are positive for the company, that are relevant to the market, that builds brand equity and connects emotionally with people. You can skip some of those things. It means you're going to be more vulnerable. Skip a couple of them, you probably will be a failure in the marketplace. But really the focus is to do all 4, and that's what we do time and time again in our success stories. Like some brilliant minds, like Einstein, we use both sides of the brain. We're very creative, but we love and work for business. That's what we feel is our agenda, or our what motivates us. Psychosthetics is a lot of it is built on understanding people. We do tons of interviews, and we have done well over 3,000 interviews, well over 300 expeditions, and we've been to well over 30 countries. So we do the ethnography, we study people, we develop inherent knowledge about how people think and work, what the differences are from people. And the research is very important to us because we've been to pretty much everywhere, and studying people in Nigeria teaches us things about how we may do things here. But more importantly, what we have to do is understand how do they do things, how do they live their life, what's important to them, and how do we resonate with those people. So to get into the process and the basis of the process, what you'll see here is a pretty simple flow. But you'll see it's very intense in foundational work. We start with research. In some cases, we've been given stacks of phone books of research that no one could tell what was in it, and we're asked to extrapolate from that. Other times it's as simple as desktop research, but you've got to do all your research, and in many cases it's deep ethnography, you take that and then you have to synthesize that, and that's where it starts to translate into real meaning and value for the process. We extrapolate out of that the key attractors, which we'll talk a bit about why we use key attractors and how that fits into the hero's journey. And then we'll actually develop the hero's journey for any challenge or project. So earlier today, we spent about 2.5 hours this morning working with the team on a Fortune 100. We're reinventing them from being a, well, we're reinventing, let's just say we're reinventing how they approach design and innovation to create more market disruption for them using psychosthetics. So my voice is actually a little scratchy from that in Andreas's early class. So bear with me. With that foundation work, that leads to design, which is idea generation, concepts, etc. Yeah, that's really where you start to really kind of, evoke great ideas. It's very interesting that as you do all this foundational work in the back of your mind, ideas start to percolate and then they come forward. Of course, then you've got to execute. And once you execute well, then fulfill the moments of truth. Moments of truth are part of the hero's journey. I'll talk more about how we address the moments of truth. Since we've been using psychosthetics for almost 30 years now, it's really shown us that we can use it on pretty much everything. We haven't found the limitation for it yet. It doesn't mean it's a be-all, end-all. It means that it has value to contribute in all of these areas. And yeah, we use it on mission and vision and advertising, and we don't just use it for product design and development. One of the critical things about psychosthetics is that it's an open framework. Pretty much we'll take any tool out there and integrate it into psychosthetics. It's an open framework, and as an open framework, what we want to do is start to map. And these are some of the critical components is our mapping. We originally looked at Maslow, brilliant mind. What is necessary to change a person is change his awareness of himself. We found limitations with Maslow's hierarchy, and today I don't believe Maslow's hierarchy is truly relevant to today's world. People will forego shelter to look like they're accepted in society, to have the right phone, to have the right coffee. That changed over the decades. But we started with Maslow, and then we started developing our own mapping system. We said, if Maslow has limitations, how are we going to look at the world consistently, time and time again, to understand things through the eyes of people other than ourselves? And what we said is, let's map interactivity and gauge self-actualization. We do this consistently. We're always looking through these crosshairs now. And with that, we created 4 quadrants, a basic, versatile, artistic, and enriched quadrants. It's interesting that that you don't have to move from one quadrant to the next. It's just understanding how these play out. To help understand how the quadrants work, we picked these examples: the paperclip, the skip loader, the Mona Lisa, and the sports car. And in the extreme, we say the paperclip is indicative of the basic quadrant, and it's low interactivity and low self-actualization. You don't think about it, you pick one up, you use it, it does its job. It's really well engineered, minimal material. They kind of even have their own look and feel. You can make things with them, but that's not its function as a paperclip. You use it, you set aside, you don't think about it. Higher interactivity would be a skip loader: eyes, ears, hands, feet. But you're not dreaming about your skip loader when you go home at night. Hopefully it's not an object that you miss. You shouldn't miss it any more than or recall it any more than you recall a paperclip. we look at low interactivity and high self-actualization in the artistic quadrant, we would say the Mona Lisa is a good example. Yeah, it's interesting because you have a process to get to see it. You've got to get to Paris. You've got to get a ticket to get in the museum. You've got to get into the museum, which when I've gone, there's a line. And then you go past what I recalled being at least 100 pieces of incredible art to get in line again, to wait and see the Mona Lisa, and you get your 20 seconds. There's a guard there, there's a rope. It's 11 by 14 inches, tiny, and it's behind glass, and there's people behind you, and you remember it for the rest of your life like it was yesterday. But you didn't truly interact with it. And then the rich quadrant, more lifestyle products, we say, you know, a sports car could be a good example. It's eyes, ears, hands, feet. It's the look of the finish of the car. It's the shape. It's the wheels. It's the sound of the engine. It's the feel of the leather. It's the invigoration. And that's the enriched quadrant, which are more lifestyle products. By the way, versatile is more, you could say, more traditional technology products, tools and such. Basic quadrant, you could say, let's think of like, you know, the house bucket would be a good example of the basic quadrant. Now, if we say, okay, let's dig a little deeper and understand a little better, let's look at phones in the USA. There's a basic phone that we get for free, which very few people buy or get, I would say, comes with when you sign up for a phone. And then we have things like the new iPhone, Samsung, LG, whatever, that are $1,000 phones and have more capability and they're more interactive, but it's much more about self-actualization as well. So we'll forego the free phone and spend all this money to have something that truly empowers us and that becomes part of us. I'm sure everyone's had the experience of that. When you start to leave the house, you don't get very far, if even out the door, without your phone. You have this bond with it. And so that's an example in the United States. What's interesting also is that now with technology overload, people are moving more towards the Mona Lisa. In many cases, I don't want to get onto my keyboard to turn on my music. I'd rather just ask Google on a device and just say, hey, Google, put on the Beatles tonight, or what's the weather like? So it's kind of interesting that technology overload has driven us into just these artistic objects that minimize the amount of interaction, but are still self-actualizing.
Ravi, I'm gonna jump in with a question, so maybe to motivate students to feel comfortable asking questions and interrupt you too, if they want to. So is it the self-actualization axis? Is it and when you compare with the interactivity, is it that the artistic quadrant is more about how I feel about myself, or how that the product or service making me feel about myself, rather than in a social context what others think about me? And when you move, is it part of the interactivity? In other words, this social component that means even if I drive that car, others think of me a certain way. But if I see the Mona Lisa, it's just for me. If I talk to Alexa, it's just for me. But if I'm in the car, in the street, and I use my phone and it's a fancy phone, people also see it, right? So is the social component at any level embedded in here?
I just added you.
Was there another question, or?
I think it was someone who just made a mistake.
Oh, so I've never studied it that way. But that seems to be very, very apparent. That paperclip has no social interactivity. Skip loader has no social interactivity. It's something I'd have to study. I think it depends in the case of viewing the Mona Lisa. It's low interactivity and it's high self-actualization. We really have to go to the hero's journey to see whether or not it is something that's viral. I would propose that it could be for yourself. it could be for yourself, but again, I'm thinking more in terms of your journey. So if you go and see it as a group, obviously you're all going to talk about it, and it's going to be even more powerful. But you still will remember it yourself. So I don't know that I see it that way. That you need the audience. In the case of the cars, many times, I mean, I drive the 2020 C4S Porsche, and I never look around to see if people are looking at me. I see
If
other
people are.
people. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe they are, maybe they aren't. I do that for myself because I love the car.
Right.
But then you do see, in Malibu, you do see people driving incredible cars, and some of them want to be seen.
Right.
So it's just, I think it's your personal journey.
Excellent.
That's not a clear answer, but I think it's an answer.
Hey, Ravi, I'll use this pause as well to ask a question. I'm curious, in this example here, it's titled Phones in the US. And so you use two phones in the example and then move into the speaker there. So I'm curious how you and your team, how you guys break out of the box, think outside of the box. And in this example, it's like not just about phones, but it's about the functionality that they provide. And then from there, that provides the leap into a speaker. So I'm curious just how you all exercise that thought process.
I'll show you that. I'll show you that deeper in the slides. But this is really to give you the kind of the framework of how psychosthetics mapping works. And the reason we picked, you'll notice it says phones in the US, because the next slide we'll talk about phones in Africa and how important it is to be audience specific. So one of the factors that you have to take in consideration, for example, this person here is a person we met when we were in Africa building bikes with World Bicycle Relief. And that's not one of the bikes that we built, but we met this person who lives in a mud hut with a straw roof, no water, electricity, natural gas facilities, kitchen. But he's got a self-esteem, and he delivers coal and hay on a bicycle. Understanding the relevance of how they see their world, that the latest iPhone, whatever we're coming into, 11, 12, what are we coming in, 13, 12, I think is the latest, I've lost track, would be so far off the mark and so unaffordable, and that the basic functionality of having a radio, a bank account, is WhatsApp, the phone, maybe listen, doing things on that phone is far upper right for that person, and you wouldn't want to over design for that market. You have to understand that market, and by doing a less expensive solution, one that we get for free here, it actually, for that person, it's much more valuable and much more relevant, could change their life, and in fact does. And riding his bicycle an hour to go charge it every few days is just fine. But it's really about understanding the relevance of the PA mapping is based on the audience of people, that who are the targets that we're looking at. And having done so much global work, that's part of it. So I answered your question with the next slide, I guess. The other part that we integrated was learning of Joseph Campbell and his work as a lecturer, a world traveler, a scholar, an author. We looked at was understanding him in the early 90s. Things like he said, I don't believe people are looking for the meaning of life as much as they're looking for the experience of being alive. Brilliant man, and what he professed is that there's a universal truth that in all cultures throughout time, the story of the hero emerges. And he built the archetype of the hero's journey, we looked at it and said, now wait a minute, really we should be looking at this and saying it's our job to put everyone on a hero's journey every day of their life. And so design now becomes a tool to take people on a journey. And it's not about the story, it's about the narrative. Anyone can create a story around something, but the actual narrative is what's critical. And we use this narrative universally, and it forces us to really think differently. So now design is used to attract, yes. It's also used to engage people. So how do we engage people, and how many engagement points should we have, and how many affirmations do we need based on the different personas to lead them to adoption? Once they adopt and they have a moment of truth, this is where an audience potentially comes in. Moment of truth could be just that the affirmation, it makes you feel good about yourself, which is powerful, or it could continue into a heroic evangelist where you need to tell other people about it. You could say I was on, Andres, I was on this journey myself, seeing, I didn't see it alone, but seeing the Mona Lisa. That decades later, I was attracted, engaged, and adopted, and had such a strong moment of truth seeing it, that here I am still talking about it and have woven it into my methodology. We all go through these experiences. We all want affirmation from others. And I'll show some examples also of that. But being an evangelist doesn't mean that you need to talk about it. It means that you need to feel positive about it. A great example that is, the simplest example I could find is that we've been working with this company Xylus for decades. A while ago, we did a can opener for them. So we studied can openers, and there's got to be hundreds of variations of can openers. We saw that you squeeze the handles to puncture the can, and then you have to think about it as you hold the two handles together. You got to coordinate. If you get distracted and you release the handles, you get a gap. You got to go back, see where the gap is. You got to go back and do it again. And we said, well, why not, develop a beautiful design with great ergonomics, but just add a latch. So once you puncture the cans, the handles are held together. You just grab this great knob and you turn it to listen to the news. You could talk to someone else. You could do whatever, but it becomes more mindless. And it was interesting that, so we lowered the level of interactivity and we increased the level of self-actualization on the can opener. And here you go, it's a $15 item with now approaching 14,000 reviews. There are a few negative reviews where they had manufacturing issues. But boy, you've got to really, really be happy with your can opener to jump on and write a review about it. That's the hero's journey. That's what we're trying to do, is to get people to just fall in love with what we've done for them. So that's very, very important in your work, is to think about the journey. So I said I would show a real life example. I have several. So Life Technologies is one of our great stories we like to tell. Life Technologies came to us and they said, we need a global design language. We've grown through acquisition. We have 30 companies, and even though they're all branded the same, people still think we're a distribution company. And we need to do something about this. So this is an example of what they came to us with. And our approach was to map. And as we started interviewing people, and what you'll find is that you get to really interview and build personas, and then you can map the personas. And we looked and interviewed multiple scientists. Yes.
Yeah, just for the rest of the class, we're gonna talk about personas and how to build personas, and we're gonna build personas in the class a little later, right? But Ravi's introducing his whole methodologies. He's using terms that we're definitely gonna go deeper later on in class too.
So as you learn the personas and you start to speak to and speak for the personas that are aggregates of your interviews, and you could do this through desktop. We do ethnography to really go deep into this. And what we found is that they weren't where we thought they would be, which is all in the versatile quadrant. Technicians are there, some of the scientists are there, but we saw that they're in another place. Now, what's critical is that as a team, and you have to think of this as a compass, not a roadmap. I always quote George Harrison, who said, if you don't know where you're going, any road will get you there. Without a map, in a visual map, it's interesting how things scatter and go all over the place. People meander and things change and shift. But by interviewing these, what we find is that in this case, they weren't thinking about DNA sequencing, which is what the company provides, as DNA sequencing technology. They weren't thinking about needs and speeds. They were thinking about the effect that DNA sequencing is going to have on the world, that everyone can live a longer, healthier life because of DNA sequencing. And what that does is create a projection where you understand where they're going. They're looking for things that are not only technology, but that are symbolic of their contribution to humanity, right? So it's a higher level of purpose that we're addressing. It's a deeper understanding of what motivates them. And that creates a visual mark that we call the opportunity zone. You could say it's white space once you start to see the competitive landscape. Sometimes the opportunity zone is already occupied and you need to understand how you differentiate and split the market. But the opportunity zone is the forward-looking projection of where we think people will be. We'll also look at branding. Our client Applied Biosystems is right there in the versatile quadrant, and Illumina, their number one competitor, is an aggregate of their branding. As we looked at it, we saw them as being in the opportunity zone. So we have to now say, okay, we need to land in the opportunity zone with our branding, which was in the versatile, AB Applied Biosystems, part of Life Technologies, and simplify that and create something that resonates for all the products. So what we did is just reduce it to Life Technologies and the badge, and we created a very low cost badge. It's basically two pieces of plexiglass. First one has Life screened on it. It's vacuum laminated to another piece of plexiglass. Technologies is silk screened on the back of that. The white is silk screened and then the adhesive. And it actually, the word life floats in air, and you can see it visibly float in air, which is more indicative and significant in DNA sequencing, since DNA somewhat floats. So we addressed that, and then we started to look at the competitive landscape. Now, Illumina is the one in the artistic zone. It is a beautiful design. This is $500,000 in technology for either the client or Illumina. While being a beautiful design, it didn't necessarily convey that it's the most state-of-the-art, the most relevant, the most versatile, the most reliable piece of technology. Truly was a beautiful design statement. It's friends of mine who designed it, and they may have even won awards for it. On the other hand, our client's product is right where their brand was. Complicated, antiquated, and for some reason carried the ethos that this is technology that must have been repurposed for DNA sequencing. Don't understand why we feel that, but it just seems to always carry that ethos of this cannot be state of the art. This had to be technology that was repurposed for DNA sequencing. Not that you could even do that, it just has that ethos. So we have to move into that opportunity zone and redesigning that same exact product. This is an example of what we did for the client. So here's the before of the exact same device, and here's the after of the exact same device. So one does present itself as being relevant, state-of-the-art, versatile, reliable, high-quality technology, and the other, not so. The only change was a software update. That is the sole change to that product.
So the most of the change is a perceptual change than a true change in terms of the how the product works.
That'd be correct. But if you can't get through preception or the perception, that'll affect everything you do.
Of course. Yeah.
Yeah, there was an old saying, don't read a book by its cover, but the fact is that you don't even pick up the book unless you like the cover. So our first product out was this product. We'll do a sequence in 2 hours for $1,000. This grabbed all the media, all the attention. The White House was buzzing about the future of medical science being based on DNA sequencing, and this became the poster child at the time for DNA sequencing. It's very interesting. We very strategically, in the design language, you'll see the commonality, but it has this kind of, I always think of it as kind of this little bit of sci-fi, a little bit of futurism, but not too extreme, not too wild. But high quality. That's part of a global design language that we had to share with over 30 product development groups to get them to all fall in line. So what you see here are some examples of different products that we've done for them. I think we've done over a dozen products. We actually built their in-house design group for them to execute. So Life Technologies, when we started with them, they had a $5 billion market cap, and not solely because of what we did, but as an aggregate and because of the Ion Torrent. They then were acquired for $15.6 billion. So 4 months after the launch of the new sequencer, while in acquisition mode, they get acquired for $15.6 billion, and now Thermo Fisher has been our client. So any quick questions about the mapping and how it works? If not, I can move on to other maps and show additional maps and product that's come from it.
Elliot had a question, at least one.
Yeah, so you showed 2 slides where you had mapped your personas, and in the first one they were kind of like on a negative slope, like going from the artistic to virtual quadrant, and then you showed another one where they were all in the rich quadrant. Was that because that was where you discovered them, but you thought that they should be in the rich? What was I was just trying to understand the difference between the 2
No, by interviewing them, we were able to identify the 2 things. One is their voice of consumer, which is the before, to identify where they are today. And then by using hypothetical stimuli and deeper interviews, we're able to project that what would we do for them tomorrow as opposed to today. Or look at it this way: what would they do for themselves if they were in our seats and they were both CMO and designer and innovator? What would they do for themselves? So it's really identifying where do you want to take them. So we know that people aren't going to take action unless you give them a reason, and the reason for them to take action and to adopt is that we want to take them to some place that's new and some place that they aspire to be, as opposed to where they are today. So it's about forward thinking and future looking white space.
Peter, did I lower your hand by mistake, or you lower it yourself?
No, actually I had a comment. So I actually work in this space. I work in pharmaceutical, and my wife actually works for Thermo Fisher now in Carlsbad, who acquired Life Tech. So I'm well aware of the space, and I've definitely seen a shift towards something similar to what you have designed for Life Tech, where the machine has become from bulky, edgy, stainless steel, very industrial look, to more high tech, white, more beautifully designed. So I definitely see a shift in the industry in general. However, for us scientists, the most important thing is still functionality, because we had a beautifully designed update to one of our core machines, but the functionality just deteriorated with the update. We bought it.
Yeah, those are table stakes. That's part of the hero's journey.
Yeah.
Don't get me excited about something that's new and relevant and that's going to be empowering for me, only to disappoint me. That's devastating to the brand.
That was exactly it. Yeah. So thank you.
Matt?
Yeah, hi. I was interested in on the interactivity scale. Is it more about how often you use it, or is it not the amount of like coordination of your senses that it takes to control? Because for an Alexa, yeah, you might only speak to it, but it also can control many other things in your house that you might interact with more often. And for some people, they use it constantly every day. Whereas like the forklift obviously takes your whole body to operate, but it might sit in the corner of your warehouse for most of its time. So I guess I'm wondering how you kind of slide those two things and maybe even other dimensions of the interactivity scale.
So if we were to, and it's case by case, and it's how you see the market. In the case of Alexa, it's really one interaction. It's your voice. All right. If you start adding your hands, your feet, so it's your voice in your ears is your interaction. It's really a very simple interaction. What's interesting is that you could, in purely aesthetic challenges, you could, and this is really getting deep into the design. I don't know if this will mean anything to anyone. Sometimes we've seen we can actually increase interactivity by creating more visual stickiness, more conceal and reveals, UI UX. We do that all the time. Layering, having people click and dig in, and we increase interactivity in different ways. But it really depends on what you're doing. But I would never say that because Alexa has all this great functionality that it's more interactive. That's compared to your cell phone, which is the comparison. It's very low interactivity.
Agreed. Thanks.
Jonathan Tenenbaum?
Hi, yes. I was wondering, how do you think about problems in B2B cases where there are multiple stakeholders? And I think it ties also to this example as well. If you're looking at scientists or purchasers, CEOs,
Yeah, we look at them through their own hero's journey. We look at them through the personification. You've got to know what's important to them, but you've got to also put them on a hero's journey. And so we do a lot of stakeholder interviews to really start to dig in and understand upfront what are the concerns of all the stakeholders. One of the early lessons that we learned, which some people seem to learn fairly often and regular, is that they don't really take into consideration decision makers and stakeholders. In the case of B2B, especially B2B in healthcare, you've got a payer, you've got a hospital administrator, you've got a head nurse, you've got a head physician, and you've got a patient, and you've got a patient's family. And they're all stakeholders, and you need to understand each one of them through what we call help me statements, which are really translations of pain points and need states into something that's more active. And you'll see the help me statements in the PA workbook that how that works. And it's kind of transformative as a team to think in those terms. But each one of them needs to be addressed. Sometimes we have individual maps for them. Sometimes they're aggregate maps, but it's so critical for a decision maker to sign off and then to feel good about themselves, to get some compliments. It's very valuable, very important.
Thank you. How about Jonathan Lee?
All right, I can help you. Thank you for being here. I was curious, with the rise of predictive analytics in developing a product, wanting to avoid wasteful resources, wanting to be as efficient as possible. in this specific example, how much data played a role in it? And I guess in general, how do you balance when maybe the data you find and things like the interviews with all the stakeholders, when they might conflict, how you kind of weigh that decision?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. We work with all levels of clients, and no one yet has come to us with analytics from machine learning or AI. Not that it's not happening. We just haven't been exposed to it. And because we deal more in qualitative, a qualitative world where we have to innovate and build relevance on both emotional and cognitive levels. We haven't been presented by that, but I anticipate that it's going to start coming forward, like a tidal wave. So, come back and ask me in a year, I guess. and it, but we'll have to take it in, and we'll have to map it, and we'll have to see how it relates to what we see. And it may generate quantitative validation and testing, which we also do. And sometimes you need the quant to justify the investment, and so we do go through quant on many programs. More for validation than for discovery.
I think that was the last question for now. I see that I don't see any hands raised. So maybe want to present one or two examples and see if that sparks other questions.
Sure. So this was a fairly large program. We looked at making baby bottles. How long does it take to do it? What's the competitive landscape? Where are people today, and where do they want to be? A lot of emotion around making baby bottles, and how do you create something that has ritual and experience and interaction and create self-actualization. This was done a few years ago, and I wonder today, how much relevance it has, but I think it even has more relevance today because they haven't launched as a product. They're really out fundraising. But understanding the parents, talk about multiple stakeholders, understanding the pediatricians, interviewing pediatricians, understanding parents with multiple children, caregivers, nannies, babysitters, understanding the differences between dads and moms, looking at their need states, their pain points, the madness around everything you have to do to make the right baby bottle, and you still have a high level of insecurity as to whether you got the formula right. One of the problems we saw is that children come into the ERs with scalded throats because the parent microwaved the bottle and popped it into the child and it was overheated. All kinds of challenges. So this was I think a 1.5-year program, and what came out of this was what we call Baby Barista. So this is a fully functioning prototype of basically think of it, it's kind of like I guess a coffee maker for baby bottles. You put water in the back, you can set the temperature and the volume, and hit the button, and what might take 20 minutes to make a baby bottle is now made perfectly in the cleanest, safest way, perfectly in 20 seconds. Has IoT, so it can remind you to make a baby bottle, and if you place the baby bottle underneath it, anyone who's had kids knows that you're trying to make a baby bottle with a screaming baby in your arms at 3 a.m. It's not a lot of fun, but you could actually just hit the go button when you get down there, or you could have the bottle ready the minute you get down there. Also with IoT, you track how much you're feeding the baby, how often. If you have a nanny, it can ping you that you fed it. It does automatic ordering. So what it does is it uses kind of a Tetra Pak package of concentrate, and it mixes that with the preheated water, so the perfect temperature. And you see the little clear part that you actually see the two of them mix and swirl together. Then it comes out in the bottle. You take that clear part, you just rotate it, and there's kind of this weave with magnets, and you weave it, it releases in your hand. You wash that, and then it's perfectly sanitized. So that's Baby Barista.
So Ravi, I want to ask you a question. If you go back 2 slides, please. So I imagine that when you guys did this study, I mean, clearly the world of parents and nannies and pediatricians is very broad. And I'm sure not all of us are congregated or concentrated in the same opportunity zone. In other words, while I might think that is a beautiful, design of the solution to my 3 a.m. problem, it might be completely out of my world. It might not be that I'm looking for such a beautiful product, because it's maybe either too over designed for me, for my traditional lifestyles. Again, since you put the the map in versus understanding the context, there might be families who are not really able to even think on that space that way. Does it mean that there were other personas that are not reflected in this map, that they went in a different direction and they are in other quadrants, and that's the opportunity for the personas you were thinking of? That makes sense?
That's correct. And those personas really defined based on their demographics, the ability to purchase a device and move in a new direction. But you can't be all things to all people.
Right.
And if you can imagine that if this was an Alessi brand, it would probably move much more into the artistic quadrant.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but you can't be all things to all people. You need to know, what your customer value is, what their ability to purchase is, what their income levels are. All of that goes into the persona building.
Right. I think Peter has a question.
Yeah, kind of a follow-on question. You mentioned, these personas. When you evaluating them, do you also look at the market size of certain personas to make sure that there is enough demand to target the certain opportunity zone?
Well, we better, otherwise you could be designing for 1%. You have to look at the market. Yeah, you have to look at the market size and lifetime customer value, annual customer value. Yeah, you've got to take it all in. These in many cases are all cases are at least multi-million-dollar decisions on where you execute. So you better define as much as you can about your personas, if they're representative of the right market. Or if you get the personas wrong, everything's going to be wrong.
Yiming? Yi? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. It's actually Mary. Sorry. And every time I change my name, and once I restart Zoom, it just goes right all the way back. And thank you so much for the lecture. It's actually really relatable. My background is actually in UX design, and my undergrad is in industrial design. And one of the questions I have is just from my own experience, this is what you're talking about here is kind of like the proper way to do design new product development, but I also feel like a lot of times that to boost up the the timelines, and also taking advantage of some of the existing resources and information, companies tend to the bad way to put it, I suppose, is corner cutting for the design process and skipping steps through along the way. Either that or that if if they're like doing something completely new, it'd be difficult to do competitive analysis and research the customer needs because there is just no such a solution like that on the market. I was just wondering if you can comment on that.
Yeah, what you'll see is that, yeah, it's a great question. What you'll see is that if you apply the tools, and this goes back to the statement that if you don't know where you're going, any road will get you there. If you just do it even at a superficial level, with just desktop research, and you build personas, even on your own impressions, maybe there's stereotypes, instead of well-built archetypes, you'll be better off. You're just automatically better off. And in going through those steps, which, I mean, yeah, you could do it, once you get good at it, you could do it superficially in a day. You're still much better off to stop and take inventory and look at what's out there. And if there's no competitive products, there's always alternative solutions to everything people do. And so I would say that even in companies that are just kind of more in the mode of what's called design doing as opposed to design thinking, and it's a problem because you see a lot of companies buried in design thinking, and they never get to design doing, and that's been a real backlash as well. It just happens that we're design doers who really needed tools to mitigate the risk that we saw our clients were being put in to create market success. And that put us in a risk position that we didn't want to go out and hunt for new clients every time. We wanted to really create our clients' success so they would be bonded to us. So what I would say is that even at the simplest level, just do it on a superficial level, and it'll help you. You do while you sketch, you can, but it stimulates everyone's creativity and really brings out tacit knowledge. If you don't visualize it, I mean, the reason we sketch and visualize is because there's something deeper going on than just mechanically drawing. It's really bringing out thought process, creativity, tacit knowledge, all kinds of good things that help us.
That was Mary?
Oh, can I also ask a follow-up question, or are we short on time?
I think let's move on. And I don't have any other student who asks questions, but I'd like Ravi to present another slide, and maybe we can chat afterwards.
Yeah, and you can email me too. I'll try to answer. Although I must be getting 500 emails a day. I feel like I'm relieved when I'm pulled away from my computer. But yeah, you can reach out to me if it's a design related question. I'm happy to address it.
Thank you very much.
Sure. So, and you can see the difference in maps. The maps are pretty well standardized now, but the maps have gone through generations. So you see the different styles of maps, but ignore that. So in this case, this company came to us and they wanted to address their poor market share compared to LK for water fountains. You see them in the airports, you see them in schools, you pretty much see them everywhere. And so, this is a case where it was a very, very quick mapping. We didn't really build it on personas. We did exactly what we were just asked about. It's like, just create a great new industrial design and use your knowledge. And we quickly mapped and said, this is how we see the landscape, and this is where we see the opportunity zone. And we also put in there how we created Flow Water, which you see at your school, which was the branding, the product, everything was created by us for Flow Water. And we said, now how do we move into what we know to be a prime target zone, a good, good white space, and how do we differentiate from LK and start to grab market share? And so you can see the opportunity zone, and here are the products we created. These are refrigerated. They're actually adaptable. You can do them non-refrigerated, but it has a water dispenser for water bottles. You know, and it elevated itself aesthetically and interactively, but not far right. You know, it still stayed, left of the crosshairs. So we moved much more kind of vertically, and we didn't really move much right interactively. And this launched, I'm glad I can show this launched either last week or the week before. So this is a Haas public hydration system. So we just picked a few. We're talking about MidTech. This is a company that came to us. It's originally named SlipChip. Was actually a group of people that took us along who had left Thermo Fisher, the LifeTech group, and they created a company called SlipChip. And what they were developing was technology that would do STD testing, female STD testing in office. So typically an STD test, you'll have to go out and get your blood sampled, and you have to wait 7 days to a week to get the results. And they developed the technology. You could do it in office in 20 minutes. And so you could wait for your results. And you can imagine the anxiety that any of us have, or I should say all of us have with testing. I can't see everyone, but pretty much everyone I know has had a panic attack and gone to get tested for COVID. And you wait for the results, and now you can get them fast, but they're not as reliable. But you can imagine that what kind of anxiety a person would have over an STD, which is on the rise. And so, you know, we created the opportunity zone, I think, based on the personas that we already knew from other medical work, and we laid out the landscape of the competition. This actually is interesting. It's not a project that I was like very, very heavily involved with. A lot of the senior team members really ran with the project, but we changed the name. We used our process to create new names, and we went from SlipChip to Talus. We created the brand mark, which is that kind of arrow that goes upward, and of course the industrial design language was created all based on the mapping. We looked at the actual cartridge or the consumable. You know, you can simply map those. If you're experienced, you really start to see, you know, where they play and where you want to go. Same opportunity zone. And this is how the actual test kit comes out. Actually goes into the device. And then looking at the branding and how do we create something that is really remarkable. We also used it for the full user interface. So the UI UX was all designed on the basics of psychosthetics and mapping competitive interfaces. You know, that's a running company that's received quite a bit of funding, and they've actually converted their technology now, I think, to COVID testing.
So Ravi, I think I don't have any other questions, but we are getting close to your, you know, timing is, you know, 8:15. And I think there are two examples that make a lot of, they're very meaningful for, at least in my opinion, when you explain PA. One is the insulin case, which I think you can share if you want to, and then the long gifting. I think it's also a very interesting case, one that I know you truly believe in it, and maybe you want to present those too.
Okay, yeah, that's fine. So this is how we looked at loan gifting. We used psychosthetics and interviewing and studying. We looked and said, what are big problems in this country that our methodology could help with? You know, what are some of the biggest challenges that you can possibly encounter? You know, if we had done it today or started a few years ago, we would have probably said, you know, how can we use this methodology to create tools to avoid voter suppression and create voter motivation. In this case, we identified student debt as a rising problem. When we first saw it, it was 500 billion. I think we're close to now $2 trillion in student debt. And what we did was we started to map and we started to build personas and we started to look at the opportunity zone and said, well, with this and seeing that we need a simple solution, what can we do? What we created was the concept of crowdfunding through friends and family. And we eventually named it actually Loan Gifting. And Loan Gifting today is a company that does two things primarily. It does crowdfunding through gifts to people with student debt, and it provides loan benefits, which are companies providing compensation and payment towards financial wellness by reducing student debt for their employees. Very, very intensive amount of technology development. So this is where we applied it to and created a fintech company. So, you know, it's the basics of 1, 2, 3, but this is an up and running fintech company that hasn't really exploded on the scene yet, but we're now in another round of funding, and we really think it's going to. Getting the technology right was incredibly hard. We had to deal with the banks, we build dashboards of people's debt, getting that right, being able to do all the things that you need to do to crowdfund, being able to manage all of your contacts, manage your loans and your contacts. And when you get a gift, send a gift out. How do you write your story? It goes on and on, but this is a pretty phenomenal program that we created. We've incubated several companies. I'll just flip it to the MiniMed. MiniMed is a very specific kind of proof of the value of design thinking. So this was done before we formally created psychosthetics. And MiniMed came to us. They had a 506 diabetic infusion pump. Somebody in the audience may be a diabetic and know about MiniMed. And they had this medical looking device that delivered insulin to you and basically simulated your pancreas. You carry it in your pocket, has a catheter, and it pumps insulin through your abdomen. And they had fallen from 60 million in sales to 30 million in sales. And it was dropping like a rock, and people were not adopting technology that could allow them to live longer and healthier. You know, pretty amazing. You could live longer and healthier if you just use this device. And people would rather not, because what we found out by wearing them 24/7 is that there was a stigma attached to it. And that when you went into public places, that the reverse of the hero's journey, that people looked at you and looked at the device and you felt this creepy feeling of the stigma. And so what we did is we took that product and just redesigned it to make it look like a pager at the time. So when you're in a restaurant, let's say you eat a bowl of pasta, you've got to give yourself a bolus of insulin, just like your pancreas would. You have to take it out of your pocket or your purse or wherever you have it, give yourself a bolus of insulin. Now it just looked like you were getting a page. And it looked like just this cool hip pager, and adoption rates soared. And the net out is that they went from 30 million, 3 years later, they went to 270 million, and then it acquired for 3.7 billion on $270 million in sales. And the only thing that changed was the industrial design. And you know, that is, it's not just the power of industrial design, it's the power of developing that critical insight and how you think about things and what you pay attention to and understanding that. You know, I'll just flip through some of the other successes. I think I'll stop. Unilever asked us to use psychosthetics to do a multi-year program trying to reduce water consumption for 1 billion people. This was incredibly intensive. Out of that came new products that just were conceptualized, like wellness additives into the detergent. So this one, probably the last example I'll share is that these are smartphones for the blind. And this is really not about psychosthetics as much as kind of validation of humanity. Of course, we mapped everything. We mapped phones and smartphones and developing smartphones for the blind with Braille active key displays. So on the left, you see the chief marketing officer. On the right is the founder of this company. And in the lower right, you see some of the prototypes. So we made physical concepts, and you see kind of in the middle picture on the right, the person holding it up to their head. So the founder feels the one that he likes the most. He puts it up to his ear, and we think he's going to be feeling to see how it feels in his hand next to his ear. Instead, he lifts his head, turns to the room, and says, "How do I look?" Tells you everything about humanity, tells you everything about the need to be accepted, tells you everything about the hero's journey and the mapping. The taking people to places where they feel accepted, they feel good about themselves, takes you right back to the original statement I wrote in '82. It's not how you feel about the design of the experience, it's how it makes you feel about yourself. So being human-centered or people-centric is really what it's all about. You just need the tools to really see through their eyes and speak to them.
Ravi, I have one more question, and I think we are close to your time. So, and I know I have use of your time today. So, Ryan, if you want to go ahead with your question.
Yeah. It seems like customer persona is very important to understand the behaviors. So, in your customer research, can you explain a little bit more about your the research part, like exercises or how you guys conduct interviews to really understand that customer so you can design these beautiful products?
Ravi, just for your knowledge and for Ryan's knowledge too, and the rest of the class, we're going to talk about ethnographic research next week, which is one of the methodologies you use to do persona analysis. And we want to work on personas for your exercise. And Ravi and other executives from RKS will come and help us in the breakout rooms as teams to work on the development of personas. So we'll definitely work on that together.
Okay. And so you'll start to see more about how we conduct the ethnography, which is really customized for each program we're involved with. But it's in this way, the things that are repeatable is that we build a mapping of the psychographic and demographics for the recruiting. A lot of times we have translators because we're traveling the world. And it starts with a questionnaire that is designed to evoke conversation. We're not doing a survey. We could do that online. It's watching their body language. It's taking pictures of them. It's understanding everything about them, letting them speak. And then one of the most valuable tools that we started employing quite some time ago are these kind of hypothetical concepts. So after we really get to know people, they get to know us, they get comfortable, we start talking, we start showing them things. Well, how would this work? Would this work for you? How would that work? And we're not testing concepts. We're using research really for creation. So the ideas can be crazy and nutty. And we're looking for people to do is say, oh, I would never use that. Or I would never use that, but if you did it this way, I would use it all the time. So it kind of involves them in the process of a deeper level. And these hypothetical kind of disposable concepts trigger new thoughts for us. We did it for Samsung. Samsung challenged us to go into the MENA area, so the Middle East, Northern Africa, focused on Muslim families. And by watching them and listening to them, throwing out hypothetical concepts, getting them to evoke reactions, we learned things that we could have never otherwise learned. And Samsung asked us to create a $10 cost of goods innovation that would be valued at $100 to consumers. And what we learned, and this was actually, I was there firsthand, we had so many interviews, I had to jump in and do interviews as well. And so what we learned was that there was actually this conflict in the homes, that religious prayers conflicted with soccer games and created a little mini feud in the family. So, you know, they couldn't afford DVRs. So we said, well, why don't you just do a software change and use the USB port? Someone can go buy a flash drive. It can record the voice and take snapshot pictures, not continuous video. And we created a $100 valued innovation for free to Samsung. You know, those are the kinds of things that, you know, that actually happen. You know, those are the things that we do.
Yeah. So, Mari, you have a very short question for Ravi before we close?
Yes, was just more going to ask that we talked a lot about, you know, how to identify the pinpoint of the user problem, but how would you translate that into quantifiable data to back up that this is indeed a product that needs to be produced or improved upon?
You actually have to go into A/B testing. So you have to really design questionnaires to develop the quant that is, you know, focused around, you got to move from qualitative to quantitative. So you've got to get through the design process. You've got to develop your hypothesis, hopefully all the way into a full working prototype. And then you've got to, you know, you've got to do the we don't like focus groups, but you've got to do one-on-one testing and interviewing and questioning. You know, you have to have the same repeatable questions. You can have some soft questions, but yeah, you've got to develop the actual data that proves that. In the case of Amana, we would have prototypes that look just like the other ranges, and so we had 6 cooking stoves all there, and one was a prototype. And it was very funny because we didn't prototype the inside of the oven, and you have a window. So we took a picture of the inside of an oven and we put it behind the clear part of the door. But you know, if you moved, it didn't change the way things would really. You know, it's like the back of those trucks where you see a picture of the inside of the truck. You know, at the right angle, it's real. But it passed, you know, and we got real data out of it. And that's how we were able to convince, you know, to convince that level of, which was $1 billion investment in total for all of the reinvention and the retooling that we could do it. In the case of Life Technologies, we didn't need to do that. We presented to the CMO, the CEO, and the CTO. In 2 hours, we showed the personas, and we built these big boards that we brought in that were all 8 feet tall and 4 feet wide, and showed everything and walked them through everything. And in 2 hours, they were able to lock in and confirm the direction that we recommended from one of 3 choices. You know, it just depends on the company, but in order to get to quant, that's how we do it. You've got to get, you know, you've got to put people in a real situation where they're looking at reality.
And we'll talk about different type of research that you can do along the way also throughout the quarter. So we'll cover some of those ideas that Ravi is sharing with us. So Ravi, I want to, I know we tire you out today, so I want to let you go. I want to thank you very, very much for being with us again, one more time, and sharing this, you know, amazing tool that you've been so successful to apply for many years already. So thank you so much.
No, thank you, Andres. Thank you, everyone.
And it's not a goodbye, it's we'll see you soon.
Hasta la vista.
Adios.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. So let's take